You are here today to hear a panel discussion by an illustrious group of contemporary Los Angeles graffiti artists. The artists on the panel will share their unique experiences and the evolution of their work toward becoming a lasting tradition. The panel will be curated by Man One and Scott Sourdough Power, founder of Cruise Studio and host of the Not Real Art podcast, and will feature graffiti artists Chaz, Boho, Pedal, Aceborn, and Zeus. Following the panel discussion, there will be a book signing of Man One's first picture book, Chef Roy Choi and the Street Food Remix, which is currently receiving national awards and accolades for its colorful and original illustrated work. Please join me in welcoming everyone to the stage.
All right, people showed up. Cool. So welcome, thank you for coming to our event and this panel that we're about to have a really good, hopefully lively conversation. Again, I'm Man One, and my partner over there.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sourdough.
And we're going to try to kind of conduct it more of a conversation than anything else. But you know, I just wanted to make sure that we had graffiti artists from different generations, different backgrounds, and obviously different gender. So
Diversity.
Diversity.
Yes.
There's diversity on diversity. So we're hoping to you know, field some questions at the end of the talk. But for now, we'll get started. Maybe Scott, you want to say something?
Sure. Thanks, man. I want to say how grateful I am to the LA Public Library for this panel. This is great, and to be a part of this is an honor. Man One and I co-host a podcast together called Not Real Art, and it's a lot of fun, at least we think so, as the name might imply. We call it Not Real Art because our favorite artists are always the ones pushing the envelope that are oftentimes told by the gatekeepers and the intelligentsia, that's not real art. Well, who's to say, right? And so one of the great things about this panel is that these are amazing artists right here who are constantly pushing the envelope and innovating. And so I'm excited to get started.
So we're just going to go right down the line at the beginning. And I just want to introduce Chaz Bohorquez and let him tell you a little bit about how he got started and, you know, how long ago he's been doing this and stuff like that.
Ready? Okay. Thanks. I also want to thank the Public Library for making this opportunity to have us speak about graffiti. All right. There was a time that we weren't able to. But, and it looks like a great crowd. Thank you all for showing up also, especially on a beautiful day and with all that traffic out there, you know. I'm Chaz Bohorquez from Highland Park. I went to Franklin, Burbank. I'm all from LA, you know, and I was born in Chinatown. I did my first graffiti in 1969. So I'm one of the originators of the graffiti movement. And in back east, they started in 67 and 69, but they stopped right away. So I'm the longest writer in the world, you know. And also meeting the other writers, I'm also the oldest, longest writing writer in the world. So, but my style is the West Coast Cholo gang style. Not that New York bubble letters and all that multicolors, upper and lower case where they write about themselves. It's kind of like a me mentality over there. They just write just a name. They don't write about their culture or anything. Where over here, we write the roll call. We write about the us. It's a different aspect about over here in the West Coast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll go over to, I'm just showing some images in the back. There, you know, we'll go through them. So we're not going to really talk about each one, but I just want to show you guys, if you're not familiar with some of these artists, which I hope you are. But let's go next to Pedal.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name's Pedal, and I am a Los Angeles graffiti artist. I've been writing since the early 90s, and I got into graffiti during kind of, I would say, probably the biggest graffiti explosion of Los Angeles. So for my generation, it's really like a rite of passage. I think almost everybody in junior high, you know, tagged a few times at least. And so for those of us that stuck with it, you know, we we came upon this like huge cultural movement, subculture of Los Angeles, and it was kind of blended with a lot of different street cultures, from, you know, gangbanging to skating, like this whole world that we were navigating. And so graffiti was like a positive artistic outlet, and it was one of the roads that I think that a lot of people that I, you know, grew up with in you know, mostly throughout the whole entire city, but I'm mostly from the west side of LA. I think that, you know, we just gravitated towards it naturally, and I just happened to stick with it, and I did a lot of illegal graffiti as a youth, and from getting in trouble so many times, I kind of wanted to continue to do it, but not have to get in trouble so much and get arrested. So I got into muralism through a lot of artists like Man One, older generation, like, you know, like one kind of big brother generation of mine. And Man actually put me in my first art show. And so it was graffiti artists who were older than me that kind of introduced me to these other pathways of utilizing graffiti. And we all thought it would, you know, evolve and explode on this worldwide level. Like, we felt it would, but we had no idea, and now here we are. So.
Awesome.
Hello, I'm Ace. I grew up in Inglewood and South Central. It's, I guess for me, sitting on this stage, I'm sort of like the future generation of everything. For me, growing up, my background, I came from the foster system, so I grew up seeing a lot of this artwork on the street, and I gravitated towards it. You know, I grew up with comic books and seeing like all these different cool cartoons on TV and stuff, and what I saw on the street just sort of caught my attention. I think I took the time to just sort of dabble in it, and it just kept drawing me in more and more, and the more I learned about it, the more I got into it. And then over the course of time, my style sort of started to shift. I started to think about things in a more academic way, and how could I still sort of utilize what it is I'm so adapted to within this growing art that I'm sort of, you know, trying to figure out as I go along.
My name is Erik Zeus Kotnis. I'm from Northeast Los Angeles. I started writing graffiti when I was about 11. Slowly started going into more murals and large-scale work, and eventually led me into illustration and to pursue college at Art Center when I was about 26, and that kind of opened the door for studying more of a classical figurative style. And then I kind of retreated from graffiti for a while, but as soon as I was done with school, I try to blend the two styles together, and that's where I'm at right now, just trying to travel and do large-scale murals with that style.
Cool, thank you. So now that we all know a little bit about what you guys are up to, you know, one of the things that I just kind of hadn't really thought about till we're here is that I've had the experience of working with you guys personally through my gallery, Crew West, also on different events, art projects. Is everyone on here on the Getty book? You read that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is just how, you know, when I was growing up, I didn't see graffiti in a lot of venues, or I knew it could be in all kinds of places. People always talk about graffiti being ephemeral. You know, you should be used to having it being destroyed or taken away. But I never saw it that way. So my question to you guys is, did you guys, because now some of your work is collected, some of your murals are permanent, some of your artwork is in collections in big museums. Was there a shift when it happened from when graffiti was just something that you did on the weekend just for fun that was going to get gone over, to all of a sudden now it's like serious stuff? Like, when did that transition happen for each of you?
It was different for me because that took about 30 years. You know, it's almost not funny. You know, in '69, in the '70s, there was no audience for graffiti. There was no galleries. There was no magazines, no books. This was before the computers. And there were no collectors. There was no dialogue about graffiti. The only graffiti out in the LA was the gang cholo style. The only crews were gangsters. That was it. So, but I fell in love with the letters. I always seen them throughout my entire life. My uncle was a zoot suiter. My father was a kind of like, I always describe him, he thought he was Frank Sinatra. We come from Tijuana, and my grandfather was a head engineer of the Hippodromo racetrack. So there was always a lot of gambling. There was always a lot of drinking in my family. There was all like that. Mad Men, those little kids where everybody had, we were those kids. All the parents drank and all that in big parties. And so I would see my cousins going into prison, and then I would see the graffiti in Highland Park. And then as a young kid, I would go down into the sewer lines and to the drainage tubes that come down to the river from the street. And I would find graffiti back there from 1940s and 1950s and found it fascinating, all done with smoke, with candles, Zippo lighters. And I wanted to know what were they saying, and I wanted to be like them when I grew up. So in the 70s and the 80s, I did it by myself. I had friends, and they wouldn't last. I ended up just going to the river all by myself and started tagging. Then I started meeting these older cholos, and I said, I need to know what graffiti is about because it is a language. It has grammar, it has structure, has punctuation. I go, if I could learn how to use this as my own toolkit, I could create my own artwork and make it my own language. I could have it as a voice. So that took 10 years or so. And at the same time, I was trying to find my Chicano identity. I went to galleries in East LA, and they were saying, hey, look, I got some of this graffiti, I call it artwork. They go, it's anti-Chicano. We're not going to show that. They go, because Chicanoism is family religions, border, Cesar Chavez, everything they were trying to do, promote in the 70s with the Chicano graffiti was against it, or they felt it would undermine everything they were doing. I ended up in Hollywood, and who gave me the green light, who embraced me at the 01 Gallery was Big Daddy Roth and Robert Williams, the cartoonist, who started Juxtaposed magazine, and Big Daddy Roth was the car hot rod designer of the 50s and the 60s. They embraced my work. They said, we don't know what it means, Chaz, but it's bad boy, because they were all hot rodders and all that. So it took a while. And then late 80s, I started meeting people like Man One, and he was turning like 17, And they were kids, and I was turning 40. And I told them, I go, hey, all this vandalism you guys are doing is going to work against you. Chaz, you're messed up. It's all about action, about vandalism. It's all about etching. It's all that scribing and all that stuff. And what they were doing was real graffiti. What I had been doing, I had trying to find what graffiti was about. And I found that the audience were these kids. And I was 20 years older than them. They asked me to start showing with them. And I had my professional people tell me, hey, you start showing with kids, your career is over and all that, because you are a painter and all that, because there was no graffiti art at that time. But in showing with Man One and some of these younger kids at that time in the early 90s, 89 and 90, once we started talking about graffiti, there was no age limit. I eventually knew had connections. I helped organize some of the first graffiti shows. I didn't do the first ones. There were other people who did that. I get credit. But together, we started building the graffiti movement in the West Coast style. I couldn't have done it myself unless with the youth. And the youth had me to break ice, talk to the police, all that, go to the courts for character referencing, try to get places, get free paint and all that. I did everything I could to support the movement in the West Coast. And it was who took over were people like Man One, once they were in their 30s, I guess,
Well, one of the things I want to say is, that's a good point you brought up. Back then, a lot of the real Chicano artists, they weren't helping us out. They weren't going to give us a hand up. There was very few of them who actually helped us produce murals or gave us a show or an opportunity. I remember having having been able to show at Frank Romero's studio one time. I remember Ernesto de la Loza inviting us to paint a wall one time, but that was pretty much it. And what was different about you is that you allowed us to come into some of the venues that we couldn't even knock on the doors, you know? And so, you know, first of all, thank you for that. But, you know, the thing was that when these people were calling you that you were not a Chicano artist, you know, where were the Chicanos supporting the Chicanos is kind of, you know, I always saw what we were doing as the next generation of Chicano art, you know?
I was rejected as a Chicano artist because there was, like I say, negative. How can you deny Cholo graffiti, West Coast, not being Chicano? I mean, you know, give me a break. You know, something.
But isn't that a classic kind of situation where you have sort of an established norm, and you know something new comes up, and it's kind of disrupting, and it's innovating, and the kind of the folks that are kind of running it are like, no, you know, we can't do that because it's not, you know, the normal thing or the conventional thing. Feels like that's kind of a classic challenge for artists, no?
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely a classic challenge, going all the way back to, like, you know, the Impressionists and different people from the Renaissance time. For me particularly, or in my experience, I was at those early shows. I was at Chaz's early shows with like Mir and different artists on Melrose at 01 Gallery. And it was really groundbreaking to see this work in a gallery setting and see graffiti art, especially to see both of them, really, to see Mir's work in a gallery setting, because he was such a prolific like illustrator and artist, and there wasn't really doors open like that even for artists from like Hollywood. And then to see Chaz's work with like the really LA gangster writing styles, and really how like that kind of it really opened the door or paved the way for looking at gang writing as art. And it really is magnificent calligraphy. You know, it's like when you look at gang styles, which is what influenced most of us taggers in Los Angeles, just seeing this like kind of like all these different fonts on the walls, just you wanted to learn how to do it. So everybody would just kind of copy it and copy the cursive and copy the gang block styles. And it was just something that I think everyone who saw that did. But seeing it in a gallery did kind of change my perspective as a really young person. I was like a teenager going to these shows. And also I do recognize that in terms of like that the Chicano artists of that day who were really popular, who were doing what we think of as traditional Chicano art that kind of resembles a lot of the Mexican muralist like masters. They were not open to supporting graffiti, and they would just encourage us to take our skills and apply them in a different direction. And I'm not Chicana, but I grew up in the Chicano community in Los Angeles, and so I worked with a lot of Chicanos, and we would definitely get, you know, there's definitely a small group of muralists from the older generation who have always supported artists coming out of like the street culture, and the majority have not. And I've had this conversation with people that I've worked for doing restorations, and they ask like, what's wrong with the younger generations, and why are they so disrespectful, and why are they, you know, why do they tag the murals? And it's because there's a lack of continuity. Like these muralists left LA for the most part to get opportunities because there was not a lot of opportunities for them here, which I understand, but they didn't come back or like keep a bridge until much later, till the scene had already been established really by the groundwork of people like Man and Chaz. And so by the time that that myself and my immediate peers got to a level where we started producing productions and doing full-scale murals without even realizing that we were doing full-scale murals. Like we just got together, like let's all paint this wall together, we'll paint the whole wall, we'll have a unified theme in the background and all our names. And that was kind of like the way we learned how to scale and do everything in terms of muralism. And what really brought a lot of us together is that immediately in that time, like in the turn of the century, basically, there was a ban against murals, and any mural, no matter how awesome it was, that was made with spray paint was gonna get like whitewashed by the city. And so one of my murals that I have on here, it's like an Egyptian mural that was in the slideshow. It actually was deleted by the city. It was whitewashed by the city illegally. And And so what happened is that this was like an epidemic, and so all these artists were like, yeah, I'm not even doing vandalism anymore. I'm about to go and like see what's up and try to fight for my rights. And people like Man and but another guy whose name is Stosh put a lot of effort into gathering the graffiti community to come and like basically protect our work. And when we went down and we ended up finally at, the DCA and at City Hall to do that, we ran into all these muralists who we've been looking at their work our whole lives. Like, there's muralists like Noni Olavisi. I saw her work on Jefferson like so much throughout my life, and I just used to pass by this mural of like, it's like a revolutionary mural with the Black Panthers and the KKK and Harriet Tubman, and I used to say, like, one day I'm going to paint a mural like that. One day I'm going to paint a mural like that. And then I got the opportunity later to actually paint with Noni, through this kind of activism, when we started to, like, go and just say, hey, we had permission for this. Why did you whitewash our wall? Like, and they would say it was gang-related or say it was illegal signage and all these nonsense excuses. But ultimately, it politicized us and it brought us together. And we were able to overcome that, and we were able to actually, get new regulations, new legislation that doesn't have those kind of restrictions against lettering and things like that are clearly targeting like LA street culture, which is often associated with gang culture, like incorrectly.
Yeah, one of the things about graffiti is that even though we talk about, I consider myself also Chicano and Latino artist, is one of the beautiful things about being a graffiti artist. I remember, especially early on, was there was no real color lines. I mean, I had friends who were doing graffiti who were Black, who were Asian, who were girls, who were guys. Didn't matter. We were always out there kind of doing it together, and that's kind of what held us together on the streets. But yeah, I want to pose a question to the younger guys on the panel, because I know how it was when I was coming up, but when you guys were coming up, what was this? Was there that same sense of camaraderie that we had when we were younger, or would that get lost in the transition? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't think it shifted much. That competitiveness was still there. The drive, maybe a little bit. I think the laws started to get tighter. There were certain things that were happening in the early 90s that I don't think happen in the like right now, that it just wouldn't happen, or else the fines and the penalties would just be extreme.
The jail fine.
Yeah, there's just so many things that I think that the youth, they might not necessarily be pushed to take those risks anymore. But that's also looking at it, the criminal aspect of it, and I think that's where the lines get blurry, because a lot of times it is that criminal aspect of the art that seems to be always like hound, and when you really dig down deep, it's beyond that, and the destruction was already there, and the core of what's happening is to uplift culturally everyone up out of that destruction and visually seeing that destruction, because at the end of the day, I mean, we didn't, like a lot of these neighborhoods where the graffiti was really like raging, it wasn't necessarily like the prettiest block, or there's like, if you really go around town, like a lot of these liquor stores have like artwork on them. They have like graffiti pieces. Why? I mean, it's a liquor store. Like you don't want to just see advertisements of liquor every day. Like, so a lot of us guys were like, hey, like, let's paint that wall. Let's do something else different with it. And maybe, just maybe, if we get along with the gangs, cool. Or maybe, we just won't have any interaction that promotes the violence. But a lot of times, when you read into it, you also see that there's a story. Like I got buddies that, they're not from here, but I remember years back, they were like, they knew where they were at because they started to see that the tags were changing. So like every time they would hit a corner, like the tags would become more blocky. It went from like wild style to like these blocky gang letters. And so then they started to figure out like, oh shoot, like I don't think we're in the right neighborhood. Like Ace, like, yo man, like this ain't looking too good. I think we went the wrong way. So like me growing up, like my own personal, I have my own personal things that I had to deal with growing up. and it just it just so happened that graffiti played a positive role in that. There's always, a positive to a negative and a negative to a positive. So like those things exist, but for the most part, I mean, there was a certain drive, there's a certain energy that I think that, like, I could feel it, like, let's see, I'd say like, I got into high school like around 2000, 1989, 2000. I could still feel all that energy surging from 1990 in 2000. Like growing up, like I could look at the art, I could see it, I could look at the history, I could talk to people on the street, I got family, like I could feel all that energy that came out of the 90s, like it's still there. So like for me and like the people in my generation, I think that we owe a debt to all those people who came out of that, like the resurgence of that, like who emerged and made it possible to actually be able to even like pick up a spray can and even have the idea of even like, hey, like maybe I can do something with this art. Maybe I could take it places, because other people opened the doors. And so by the time it all hit me, it's just a matter of like, man, like what's here can't die out. So how can I keep that alive? And then at the same time, sort of, what do you call that? Sort of transform, like, create art that's purposeful and it's transformative at the same time, because also the culture and the way that we define art is kind of shifting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, I guess I came up doing graffiti in the mid to late 90s. And so I saw this big shift, especially like Chaz was talking about with the 01 gallery. I remember those shows on Melrose. Those were what influenced me to go from the streets and just doing illegal graffiti to sitting inside and working on a painting and taking that painting and elaborating on it and doing a mural and trying to push my craft a little bit farther. So seeing these type of murals, or like, man, I would take the bus every day from high school on Cesar Chavez and see your mural. And I was like, that, before I even met you, that was something that inspired me to want to paint something larger. And seeing the shift in graffiti going from just the streets and illegal onto murals, liquor stores, and then into galleries, that was something that drew me into it even more and more, and kind of pushed me and made me really passionate about what was to come. And then now, 15 years later, you see where it is. It's mainstream. It's before, back then, 99, 98, you could tell someone you were a graffiti artist and you'd be looked down on. Now you tell someone you're a graffiti artist and what you do, and there's people that come up to you and they want you to sign their book, or they want to see your work and purchase your work. It's a really interesting shift that's happened. And I know there's negatives and positives to that, but I think without that shift, I wouldn't be able to have this as a career. And I never thought that this would be a career or something I could make money off. I never wanted it to be that. I just was having fun, and it was something I was very passionate about. And it kind of grew from there. But because of the groundwork that these gentlemen laid, I'm able to make a living off this and do what I love. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Did you consider yourself an artist before you got into graffiti?
I didn't consider myself an artist, no.
Yeah.
Because I got into graffiti by taking the bus every day for an hour and a half from a school in East LA back to the Northeast. And first it was just scribing on the window. So I would just sit there and I'd scratch my name in the window. And then one day I ran across a guy that was like, maybe you should try and do something a little bit more elaborate. And he was like, let's go down in the river and let's try and do something. His name was Turn. And we went in the river the next week, and he showed me how to do a piece. He did 90% of the piece at the time for me, but that had me hooked. It was every other day I was ditching school, going in the river, painting, and that kind of grew from there. It was like the beginning of an addiction.
Yeah,
to graffiti.
Not to rat you out or anything like that, but this guy used to do some massive roller pieces, right? Like in the Yellow River. I'm talking huge pieces. And when I first started seeing your work, obviously it was in your face and you couldn't avoid it. But to tell me years later you're going to be doing stuff like this, like I had no idea, And I think that's part of the beauty about graffiti that I love, and I think that we're all sharing here. But, you know, when did you make that transition from just like bombing, doing big pieces to like, you know what, there's a fine art twist to it? I mean, was it intentional, or did you just kind of fall into it?
There was a few things that came into play with that. At that time, I loved doing those pieces. One thing was the river got washed. They painted over every single piece of graffiti in the river. The second thing was I was kind of fed up with the politics of graffiti and who I could paint with, and I had to paint with my crew, but I couldn't paint with these other people, even though they were my friends. So I kind of started to separate myself from that. And the third thing was I hit up a guy who was a building owner down the street from my house, and asked, could I do a mural on your wall? And he was like, yeah, I'd love that. Come in. I'm an artist too. And he let me in his studio, and he had a show that was about to be shipped to New York. And his name is Steve Houston. He's a figurative painter. And he had about 20 large-scale oil paintings of boxers just all laid around his studio waiting to be shipped. And immediately when I walked in, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do something just that detailed with that impact. And from then on, I traded the mural for his art lessons. And he just schooled me in figurative work. So that kind of separated me from graffiti for a while because I really dug into that. And that was kind of the transition into the more artistic mural side from the graffiti illegal aspect.
One of the things that I'm really inspired by is the fact that you are really a multidisciplinary artist. You know, you went to school, you've studied. You know, I don't know. Would you say the majority of graffiti artists out there are multidisciplinary, or you know, are they sort of like just have a few tools in their toolbox, or I mean, like, are you the exception or the rule?
No, I think it really runs the gamut between all artists. It really depends on how. I think at one point I realized to make a living doing art, I need to know how to do graphic design. I need to know how to paint with oils, paint with acrylics, paint with watercolor, be able to work in any medium, any style, especially doing stuff in the movie studios. They kind of expect you to know all these different things.
So we're looking at an amazing production of yours right there. Talk to us about that. What are we seeing right here?
So this is a high school in Huntington Beach, Edison, and they approached me to do a mural with, they like the classical kind of artwork that I do. And I told them what I needed. I needed it to be primed, painted over, and then the paint. And I said, I can't have any restrictions on what I do. You got to just let me go. The only restriction they did give me, and I was okay with, was with the color, because of course it has to be school colors. So I just ran with it. It took me about 3 weeks on and off. It was, you know, about an hour away because it's a far drive down there. And it actually says my name throughout the whole building, which none of them know.
Subliminal. So, okay, but break this down and unpack it for us a little bit. I mean, how many hours do you think, or days or weeks, did it take you? I think you said maybe 3 weeks or something, but what was the process and the inspiration behind it?
So it's a wrestling gym for the Edison High School team, and they just wanted something powerful. And I thought these kind of were powerful, iconic images, you know, the Greek gods and the wrestling and these sculptures and the way they're lit. It just has some kind of essence. And with the kids underneath where they wrestle, it's kind of, you know, intimidating to have these big gods looking down on you, making you small. But then it also gives them power, I think.
So, do you remember about how many square feet this is? Is this?
You know, I think each wall was about 75. The long walls are 75, and the back wall is about 45 or 50. And it's 35 feet tall, I believe.
So you're bringing in, what, scissor lifts or cherry pickers? Or
yeah, we had a huge scissor lift that probably shouldn't have been on that wood floor, because every time I drove it, it would crackle. And I kind of got worried that it was going to go down one day.
Well, I mean, that's awesome. You know, I have a question for Petal. People always, every time I do graffiti events or anything else, they're always like, how come there's no women graffiti artists? How come there's no women graffiti artists? And I always have to give them my mansplaining on it. So,
Man one-splaining.
yeah,
Your man wants explanation.
yeah. Well, I would rather you tell them because
No, but I'm just curious, what do you tell them?
Well, I usually tell them, you know, in LA, graffiti, you know, especially when I was coming up, it was really rough, and a lot of girls don't want to be running around in the middle of the night, you know, just because of the dangers of LA. And most of the girls that I knew that did graffiti were pretty tough, you know, and you know, that's changed over the years. I think because of street art and everything, making it more acceptable. But in other cities, I saw more women in graffiti. Like in Europe, I saw a lot of women doing graffiti in Europe because I don't think they felt like, to me, that at night they felt a little safer than in LA. But, you know, that's just my take on it.
Well, coming up, I would say that female graffiti artists were less than like 0.01%. There was more than 1,000 guys doing graffiti for every girl that was doing graffiti, for sure. And a lot of it is because it's a rough sport and it's dirty and it's outside in grimy places and, you know, nighttime. And so I think that, you know, that is a big deterrent. It's also cultural, you know. It's like there's a lot of kind of patriarchal cultures in Los Angeles, and, you know, Latino culture being one of them, Middle Eastern culture, Asian culture, white American culture, Black American culture. They're all pretty much patriarchal. So,
Yeah, which culture is it?
So I
Messed
think
up.
that girls are less likely to like really overcome the initial challenges of doing graffiti successfully, like actually going out and getting up. I think that for LA, you know, the bus graffiti movement was so huge, and so everybody took the bus, boys and girls. So during that time, there was a lot of female graffiti. There was a lot of female taggers. But I think that, you know, right now around the world, there's an explosion of female graffiti artists, and it's really amazing. And a lot of them it's kind of strange because in LA, or for us, most of us started tagging and doing graffiti and then got good at it, and that's how we became artists. Like we were not artists that started to then do graffiti. But because of the evolution of graffiti, there's now a lot of people who are entering into the graffiti art genre after coming out of art school and things like that. And they really like the medium of spray paint. And, you know, there's like every day I get in my Google alerts for like female graffiti artists, some kind of women empowerment mural or team or artists somewhere. Yesterday, I think it was from Turkey. It's like all over the world. It's exploding. And that's because the definition of graffiti is different in different places. And one of the main things I think that a lot of us focus on is that, like, when kind of making the distinction between graffiti and street art, is that graffiti artists like learn how to do art from doing graffiti. It's not like a method of putting our work up that we choose to use, you know? So that's really, for me, what makes somebody a graffiti artist. And right now there are a lot more women, and I think that's because, you know, if you can just open the door for a few women, or it's just like opening the door for any other group that's been kind of like pushed out of something or not let in, then the floodgates open. And, you know, once one girl sees a female graffiti artist, then she knows she can be one too. That's how it was for me. I saw Lady Pink, I saw Omega, Chalk, and then Blossom, who would eventually give me my name. So it's like, I mean, it was a lot different back then. It was a lot different up until, I would say, even the last 10 years, that there was a lot fewer females involved, and especially with the street culture aspect. But I think a lot of people do graffiti, and just a very small percentage stick with it. And so now you see like a huge difference, because women are just becoming more empowered in general. And girls, you know, from the younger generations, they don't have the same, they don't have the same factors, and the same level of patriarchy kind of directing them. There's like huge explosions of feminism happening all over. So I think that encourages girls to get out and express themselves. And a lot of people see graffiti as not even so much as being culturally defiant, but like just really seeing it as a way to magnify their voice. And I think that that's where we all come from. Like, graffiti in its essence is the voice of the voiceless. And illegal graffiti is what we do in order to learn how to do, you know, elaborate artwork. It's like almost like a school, you know? And when it comes to vandalism, like, you know, I think that people's opinions on vandalism should really be more like well thought out, because when you talk about public property, like when you talk about private property, there's no question about whether vandalism is somebody going and vandalizing another person's property. When it comes to public property, especially dilapidated public property like the LA River, like, come on, this is not the same level of vandalism. And also there's like, we all pay taxes, even if we just pay sales tax. So it's like, who gets to say whether the LA River, you know, like, it was such a waste of money to buff the LA River. We weren't hurting anybody going in there learning how to paint. We all like learned how to paint in there. And now kids will go to jail if they're painting in there. It's ridiculous.
Well, I have an idea for the LA River.
All right, well, I'm with it.
Yeah, I told someone that we should paint the LA River for the Olympics, the LA 28 Olympics.
But we don't want to paint Olympic murals.
No, we want to paint our own murals on the LA River, all whatever 60 miles of it, or whatever it is.
Right? That would be amazing.
People laughed, but you guys heard it here.
It'll
You guys
happen.
petition, and we'll paint it, and we'll get other friends to paint it. But you know, I think. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say I didn't laugh.
Oh, yeah. That's why you're my partner.
You made that happen once.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually,
happen again.
and got buffed. We won't talk about that today. I have a question for Chaz. You know, a lot of the younger generation, when they talk about being an artist and making a living, they really don't know where to go or what to do. And you know, you're from the older generation, but I see you on social media. I see your website. I see your Instagram. I see all this stuff you're doing, and it's not slowing you down. It's actually like catapulting you, I think. What advice do you have for like younger artists who get stuck in like promoting themselves or what they want to do? And you know, it's like it's their generation. You know, they were born with a computer, not us.
Yeah, I remember as right 90s when I met you guys and all that. I used to go up to the city hall and they used to ask me about the youth. What was I doing to protect the youth? I was going to put you in jail by encourage you to doing graffiti and everything else. And I kept on saying, I go, no, the best way to get the youth out, to get the crime out of the graffiti thing is, I kept on telling you guys, do more graffiti. You know, which means that you get more involved. Your skills get better. Which you start talking to people from New York. When the computer came in on your account, on your time, because it was your generation who brought it in, I remember Mir was saying he got a website and described it to me, and it was like the early 90s or something like that. He goes, yeah, you need one. It didn't make any sense for me. I said, no, you need to do the work first. Eventually the social media turned into what we had to do. When we were young, we had to go to New York. Because in New York, you had to get a review from an art magazine. If you got a review from an art magazine, then you would get into a good gallery. And that only happened in New York. LA was a backwash. Plenty of artists here in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, but you could get no recognition, no traction. So you had to go back east. And then what I noticed is that with the youth is that, let's see, how did it happen? I started getting my website, and after right now is I'm on social media. Finally learned what a boomerang was, you know, so we got that. I don't do it. I get young people to do it for me, you know. And if you're not on social media, you don't exist. So, I mean, and I realize if you got a photo of a picture of me just hitting a tag, I might get 1, 2, 3, 4,000 hits. If that same video was just me moving it, I'll get 5,000 to 8,000 hits. It's kind of like it's what the audience really wants to see and be engaged in it. They want to also be graffiti writers without having to leave their living room, you know. It takes work to be a graffiti writer. It takes physical work. It takes hand skills. It takes going out there, climbing ladders and all that, getting dirty. It takes a hustle to be the writer. But to get exposed, we were in Rome, the Roman Modern Art Museum. I was there with the street art, which I'm not really don't care for that word. I like graffiti because it's a form of art form where you have to fight for it, where you have to defend. I like the word graffiti. Street art is great. It's what opened up an opportunity for me. But I was telling these guys, I'm going up against 20-year-olds, and I'm going to be turning 70. So I'm 50 years older than these young bloods who are we're going both up on ladders and all that. They keep me young. I enjoy doing graffiti. I love to paint on the streets, Most of my work is in the studios, but it's kind of like once you're hooked, you never give it up. And then now I am collected by MoCA and LACMA and 3 of the museums of the Smithsonian and a bunch of other museums throughout the United States. But that just kind of big talk sounds great because museums don't do anything for you. It's kind of like I get a kick when I see a young kid going down the street on one of my decks, designing and wearing one of my T-shirts. That's my paycheck. I get excited about that, Culture is fine art now. That's what we are. We are ambassadors of culture. We create what the world is about, What's an artist? We're special people. We're the image makers. Who else can take your abstract thought of past loves, of memories gone by, of the future, abstract thought, or something that you read or something that you see on TV, get all that imagery and dialogue and get it all into one piece of paper and organize it. That's what we do. We create art. We create our culture. And, I think you got some really good people up here.
Chaz, you touched on something that I'd like for you to expand on and have the whole panel talk about it as well. You touched on the difference between graffiti and street art. And if I understood what you were saying, you were saying the principal difference between the two is the struggle that you have with graffiti art versus street art. Could you talk a little bit more about the difference between graffiti and street art? And I'd like to have the panel talk about that as well.
That difference is my own personal opinion. Because street art is turned into graffiti. Some of the most fantastic, most beautiful pieces are done by street artists. And now everybody's good. You pick up a book, everybody is good in the world. Like I said, we're invited to Tokyo, Rome, Australia. Let's see, I got a piece I got to finish up for November for Australia, New Zealand. Like I say, Italy, Spain, we go all over. They invite us. They pay for everything. That it's because the street artist and the street festivals. Before to be an artist had to be in a gallery. Now you're competing against walls in cities. You're going by blocks and blocks of artists, and I'm meeting artists from all over the world, from South America, from Japan, all at the same time, and a lot of young women. The Japanese women are killing it over there, insane. So I'm not here to complain about the street art. They've offered me a new opportunity. It's just in my sense, I like that struggle. I like that, like I say, I like cholo graffiti. We should scream blood in, blood out,
Right. I always, my main thing with like the difference between street art and graffiti is really like, graffiti artists, like I said, learned how to do art from tagging and from like going through the process of making graffiti, from tagging to the bubble letters, to the pieces, to the whole productions and everything. And so it's it's really a different type of training. I just have a problem with the term street art because it's like an academic kind of it's like a redefinition of graffiti, or like, a new label basically. And I've heard these ridiculous people that like have no knowledge of the history of graffiti, especially in Los Angeles, talking about terms like post-graffiti and being in a street art era, and talking about how street art, like, how women weren't allowed to do graffiti because there's some kind of like graffiti organization that makes rules or something. And that that men, you know, that street art basically opened the door for women to do graffiti, which is like a huge insult to female graffiti artists who, like, you know, went through the whole struggles to fight sexism in graffiti. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's just like an academic convoluted term that's created by like art school hype. And I'm not into any of like, I'm not into art school, academia, languaging surrounding art, especially when it comes to graffiti, because graffiti is a secret language, it's a hidden world, and it's only now kind of in the last decade kind of been telling its own story in Los Angeles. And so I don't like it when people from outside the culture come in and try to tell this like whole history and paint this picture, because they don't know it, and it actually takes a lot of different graffiti artists and crews and people from all over the city to tell their own stories in order to really develop the full story, because LA is such an expansive landscape and we have so many different cultural communities and socioeconomic communities. So yeah, to me, street art is kind of like a cultural appropriation, the term itself. And I just don't understand why people don't call themselves muralists or like a public artist. It's like, what makes you a street artist? You know, because there's a word for that already when you paint walls. And so I just think that, you know, it's like kind of trendy of a term. And I don't particularly use it. In my career, I have asked people to not refer to me that way, but I've kind of had to ease up on it, especially in an international setting, because it's totally, you know, graffiti is different in different places. Graffiti in LA is different than graffiti in New York. Like, we deal with the stigma of gangbanging and racism, and we have these like kind of violent type of like this idea of violence projected on us when we were actually trying to like go a different direction. And so, yeah, I think that in LA, it's particularly sensitive, especially with the explosion of gentrification street art. But yeah, I could go on about that.
Well, I think to me, one of the differences about graffiti and street art and being a graffiti artist my whole life was that it was based on lettering, and that's kind of you know what it was about.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the beginning of it. Like, we learn scaling, we learn everything from doing letters.
So letter was the subject matter, and then that drove forward. And which leads me to ask Ace, you're doing this kind of work now. What the hell? How did it get there? How did it go from your lettering to like this, you know? And because I still consider you, you know, graffiti artist. I still consider you an artist, whatever. But, you know, the stuff you're doing now, you want to explain a little bit about this style you're working in?
Yeah, sure. Just thinking about the whole street art graffiti thing, you know, when I guess somewhere in these early 2000s somewhere, I guess when I was getting out of high school, when I was getting out of high school, I was kind of like going back and forth in my mind, do I even want to pursue art in general, you know, like, you know, you asked the question earlier about, you know, did you consider yourself an artist first? And I thought that's how I used to think until, you know, I saw a classmate one day, you know, doing some piecing on a black book, and I was like, what is that? And then I got hooked into that lifestyle. But moving into this, I think it was me tapping back into the artist side and starting to see this whole surgence of street art and knowing what the essence of graffiti really was for me, and that street art was sort of like it wasn't really like the label that I looked up to. Like, that wasn't the label that I wanted to run with. So for me, I needed to process beyond those labels, and where was I going to go personally? And looking at some of the guys that I looked up to, Chaz being one of them, you know, how do you just be you and go beyond everything and not just sort of get caught up in these labels? Because from what I see, you know, I felt like there was like a trend. Something's trendy and everyone wanted to hop on this trend. And when I looked at a lot of street art, just like street art over the course of history, it seemed like for me, it all had some relationship to propaganda. And I had to ask myself, well, do I want to go down the lane of dealing with propaganda? Like, I don't know if, you know, and to do things that are based on propaganda is also to be looking at political issues and relating those things back into the artwork. And I don't know if I want to spend my day doing that, because I think that right now we're in a time where people need a peace of mind. They need to see something that has a relevance to nature and the original order of life and how nature works outside of all these propaganda, like imagery. So I didn't want to get involved with that. And so I was always into the fine art stuff, the more like, Rembrandt, the Baroque period, seeing a lot of Art Nouveau, Alfonso Mucha. I was really attracted to a lot of those guys. And over the time, I started to find out that some of the writers that I looked up to, who also considered themselves artists outside of graffiti, they were also attracted to these same classical arts. And I sort of said to myself, I think I want to think outside the box and go down that lane, because, when you're running up and down the block and all day and you're working with spray paint, it's a little different. You forget about there's the brush. You could just simply pick up a brush and start painting. And of course, that's what I did. I just picked up the brush and said, you know what, I'm going to go back to this level of art. And having conversations with you, Chaz, I think that also helped speed that kind of thought along for me, because there was a lot of history I was learning about outside of graffiti. And I felt like I needed to start to implement that, not just for myself, but also future artists, and thinking about not just graffiti, but what it meant for me in the Black diaspora, and looking at it in other cultural diasporas, and how can my work be reflective of all the cultures, in a sense? Because I think in my neighborhood, it's sort of for a lot of people, it's sort of like everything comes from Africa. Africa is the birthplace of everything. Everything spawns out of there. So there's that struggle that's already there, that I think that I've trained myself to see beyond, because I'm sort of, for my people, a lot of it is this feeling of being born into that. Like, you're born into this struggle. Like, this is the curtain that's pulled over you that keeps you from seeing a broader picture. And so for me, it's being able to paint a broader picture, look into the psyche, and give the psyche something to meditate on outside of what is currently like being pushed on society. And I think that, overall, like, I just locked myself in the studio one day and said, let me start kicking out work and stop running in circles. Instead of running in circles, let me start painting these circles.
So, question though.
I'm going to chime in on that real quick.
Oh yeah, of course.
Just to speak to what you were saying, I think that at a certain point, a lot of us, when our work evolves to a level that we're actually impressed with, we experience this like healing, kind of like therapeutic, enlightening feeling, and then we want to share that with everybody. But not in a way that it's like, oh, here, I have this healing thing. It's like, we just want to share the energy. But it really becomes this like cultural, social, community process of like trying to like spread this positive energy, especially when you're painting murals, because you're putting that out into the world. And so, I think a lot of us started from a place of extreme anger, and then we're able to go work through that, and now we're here, so we're like, oh my God, and now like we're here with these crazy opportunities to talk to people at the public library. Like, we probably tagged in the bathroom of this library, like all of us, as kids.
Like, for the most part, like a lot of the work you see here that I've done, there is a deeper, much deeper explanation to it. But I could definitely go on and on about it. To sort of kind of tell you what I mean by that, the circles, they kind of act as a oculus. So when you think about a cathedral, there's a dome inside of a cathedral, and sometimes you go and you look up at the dome. That's sort of how these mandalas work. They work like portals, but they're also to kind of open up this new paradigm within space and time, as if you are actually inside some sort of cathedral and you can look up into the heavens. So there's that notion in my head. So when I paint these things, I kind of have all these ideas running through my mind.
Well, I mean, okay, it was the music. It felt like the Oscars when the music starts going, like you're almost out of time. We still have time, right?
There's no award.
We got the time.
Was that a parade going by? What was that exactly?
I don't know. It was cool. One of the things I wanted to ask was just, everyone here has had their own journey, either gone to school, not gone to school, done whatever they've done. But now we're all here sitting next to each other, and there's a huge art movement that we're all part of in one way or another. So looking into the future, like, what do you think is going to happen to this movement? What do you think is going to be your role in it? Or, just what do you think about where you're going to be at in the future, whether it's a year from now or 10 years from now, whatever. Maybe talk a little bit about what the future can be for your art. Anyone, whoever wants to start.
I'll start it. I think there's great opportunity for all of us. In 3 weeks we're off to China, to do a mural and then design a toy and stuff. That opportunity is offered to a lot of people that never was there is before. I think the Beyond the Street show that was recently here in LA, that's moving over to New York in March. First time New York has ever had a major graffiti art show, because they hate graffiti in New York. We've been trying to have a graffiti show over there, and the city council over there will pull funding out of a museum if they offered a graffiti show. So New York was, even though Mecca in a lot of ways, it started. And let me tell you, they only paint during the summer. They don't paint in the winter. We're over here in the West Coast, we paint 12 months out of the year. I remember a long time ago, the early 90s, we were having these meetings, and I was telling the young graffiti guys, I said, we'll never beat New York. They have the history. They got the bubble letters. They got all that, I go, we'll never beat them on their own history and all that, but we could beat them by being better painters, and we could be better artists. And I think LA kicks ass over most any other artist in the world, We're not only creative, but we're also inventive, and we're out there, it's pushing our scene all over the world. So I see this blowing up. In my personal thing, I can't go up on walls anymore, losing strength in my hand and everything else, and now getting old, eyes are bad. But painting is my next journey. I'm going to be opening up more of those museums and all that. And then, who's my collectors? Surprisingly, it's the 1% of the 1%. It's the bling generation are who validate me, So what's happening now is, they put money in my pocket, but I do want to say about graffiti. Real graffiti will always be in the streets, or street art, whatever we want to call it, happens in the streets. But if you want to talk about its intent, its purpose, its history, its social involvement and all that, you bring it into the walls, or you bring it into the magazine pages. That's where we get our dialogue. That's where we're always writing about it and everything. That's where we start getting languaging, definitions. That's why we need words because when I speak about graffiti, I need words to describe it, of what we're really doing. So graffiti has become very academic. I've helped a lot of theses for master's programs, out there. So it's going to grow and grow. It's going to be more about fine art. I think there's going to be more of a career where we all going to be making more money and all that. I remember you said about an artist. We never called ourselves an artist. It was too high of a definition unless you were actually making money. You had a career in it. You were actually making. Then you could call yourself an artist. We were writers. I'm a tagger, basically. I didn't do productions. I'm tagging to paintings to galleries.
Kind of productions. The roll calls, they were kind of like early productions.
Oh, that's a tag of all of us. That's a party painting.
But the composition, you didn't realize the composition and all that.
I went to art school. I went to Chouinard Art Institute for 3 years and all that. I was a ceramics major, but there was no career in that. And then when Chouinard went out there to Cal Arts, I had to reapply. And they said, your drawing skills suck. so they kicked me out, you know. So that made me go back. At the same time, I was doing graffiti in the streets, and during the day, I was painting naked people, you know. So I didn't even combine that graffiti for me in the early 70s. I didn't consider it fine art. I kept it separate. I did not do my first fine art painting until 1980, where I felt I could bring my graffiti of 10 years into my art school and created my first painting and all that. That was 1980, and it was that roll call. And then it got picked up by the Smithsonian in their permanent collection. And then that was in 93 when I turned 40, 92. When I turned 43 is my favorite number. My life changed, you know. And then the Chicana started talking to me, you know, after I was in the museums. So there is a future out there for all of us, I think, as artists. But like I said, everybody's good now. Only the best are going to survive, you know, which I look forward to it. I intend to be around, you know. I'm going to kick some butt.
For me, there's definitely been, you know, in the last few years since we did the whole struggle of like the mural ordinance and trying to have legit ways to make our art. Now, you know, there's always the challenge of finding funding to do major projects. And there's all kinds of funding for art available, but it's really difficult for graffiti artists, no matter how we like disguise ourselves or color ourselves, to actually get access to major funding. And so I've just been kind of looking and exploring different angles in how people do that outside of public funds and like looking into private partnerships. Right now, I'm a teaching artist, so I work with youth, and that's kind of like my main mission because of the absence of elders during my like formative years as a young artist and in my formative years of transitioning from doing just illegal graffiti to doing legal murals. I just want to be able to create pathways, and so it's really awesome to work with youth, and I work with a lot of youth that are really kind of in the most vulnerable populations. And actually we took one of my classes over to the Beyond the Streets show, and we ran into Chaz that day. And so all these kids who have looked at his work for years were able to meet him and see him. And I think understanding like the generations of like the, you know, like that this is a pan-generational movement, make them see that they do have more opportunities. So for me, you know, I agree. I think that graffiti is the dominant art genre in the world right now, and that it will continue to be because it's so accessible. And it's just like, you know, anybody who can get a permission for a wall or just find an abandoned wall that nobody cares about, which is like happening all over the world. And, you know, all over the world in different cities, like in Turkey, they were saying that like they don't generally mess with the artists when they're just painting abandoned buildings, which, you know, I just read in this one article, but I've heard that in Europe and stuff, it's much easier to just paint abandoned structures than it is here. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of continue the work that I've been doing and help to open doors that, you know, haven't been opened for me. And I think in doing that and in continuing to strengthen our alliance, that we'll get access to do like major legacy murals and represent our city, because we've had like thousands of murals whitewashed, and we really need some like major, like large scale works that are going to last for decades, like the Pope of Broadway style, at least, you know, like 5 stories, 10 stories of, you know, all of the different LA graffiti artists who have traveled the world. Like, it's so crazy how so many artists have murals all over the world in like 50 different cities and don't have like a real solid wall in Los Angeles and or downtown LA, when there's all these like hipster transplant artists painting these big, huge murals. And because they're like connected already with the building owner. And so that's the thing, it's like working with the city, they always try to keep us away from the building owners. So I'm like, now I'm going to the bid directly, and I'm just trying to like build those bridges, because, you know, I got pushed into this anyway. Like, my work got buffed, my stuff got whitewashed over and over again, and I was forced to fight for my rights. And then here I am, and now I'm like learning, you know, the next steps. And then I call people like Man, and they give me advice on, you know, how to proceed. But yeah, it's kind of experimental. But we do have a big support network, and we do have international interests. So that's cool. And yeah, I think the youth are the future. I think we're going to have like an explosion in the younger generation of magnificent muralists and really put LA back on the map.
So we have about 15 minutes left, I think, and we wanted to open up for some questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions, so for any of the panelists, or else we keep talking. Yeah. We have an extra mic? Yeah? Okay.
The question I have is there's a lot of crossover with murals and graffiti art, like say Dogtown and the skater culture, and some bands like Suicidal Tendencies and Rage Against the Machine. But for the most part, the graffiti scene didn't seem to, or for say hip hop being one of the main tenets. But it doesn't, when I think of like the LA punk scene, especially like the hardcore scene, there wasn't really any sort of crossover. Was it because graffiti was inner city while the punk scene, especially the hardcore scene, was like suburban white kids?
I would say yes, but actually there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot more punk rock graffiti writers than people realize. They're just more the hip hop punk rock heads. They're like not as much of the exclusive punk rock, you know? Like more like the ska punk rock. Because I know some of my, like, my elders or, you know, some of the guys that I came up under were into punk rock, like hardcore, the CBSs, West Coast artists, like a lot of the West Side guys, Hollywood punk rock. But, yeah, for the most part, the suburban scenes, like the suburban graffiti writers would have to come into the inner city to really engage the rest of the graffiti scene. So I think that's a big part of it. And also graffiti, as much as it's really diverse, is very I think that there's an aspect of the kind of like racism and like kind of Nazi stuff that goes on in the punk scene in that part of it that definitely doesn't resonate in the LA graffiti scene. Like it wouldn't have even been able to get past like white boys in the LA graffiti scene. So there's that element of it that makes us like, we're really, even though we're diverse, we're like really anti-racist.
Another question?
Does anybody else have something to add?
Well, you may remember the lawsuit that was made against the city as a try to clarify commercial versus art. And so finally it was resolved, and I thought that would free the way to make it much easier for the artists in this area to get work. So the question is, has that really happened? And the second, do you remember the station that used to be on Lucas as it terminated to Beverly and First, where there was a space where artists would always change the graffiti?
The Belmont Tunnel.
What?
It was called the Belmont Tunnel.
Yeah. And so has other spaces evolved like that, where artists just come and explore and change and keep going?
Yeah, I think so. I think, well, it's an awkward question, I think, because, especially for graffiti writers, Belmont Tunnel was like, I mean, actually, I miss Belmont Tunnel. Like, I never really had, like, that's out of my generation. But I know enough to tell you that it, like, LA in general is the playground. So, like, you have all these yards, but the yards are the yards, and they're always going to be there, and they're kind of like, no one really wants to let you know where this yard is, or because it's their yard. But there are places that, like, for example, there's Graph Lab, like that, but that's a yard, you know. And that's open to a lot of people. They just have maybe 2 rules, like leave a can, you know, like, but do what you want. But they exist.
So Belmont Tunnel was a mecca. It was like kind of a headquarters of graffiti, and it was not a legal space, but in a lot of instances, it was like, you know, the cops wouldn't. It was like a really heavy gang infested neighborhood, so the cops weren't thinking so much about the taggers. I guess they would only go in to bust the writers when they were bored or not busy or something. So, you know, people would be playing soccer up in there on the weekends, and a lot of people, myself, my generation, we just would go in there and like explore our art skills. You know, we could go there and actually do like an elaborate full colored piece and just chill out. And it was local, so it was like easy to get to. And it was this awesome historic train station that, you know, was left over from the...
There was that Mayan game they used to play there.
Oh, yeah, the pelota? Yeah. So, yeah, it was like a really awesome community space. And like a lot of other spaces similar to that, abandoned structures that became graffiti yards and were used by the community, it was developed. And now it's like an apartment building. And the tunnel still exists, but it's sealed off. And it was like toxic waste when it was open, so I would not recommend going inside. But yeah, so in terms of the Belmont Tunnel, there are really not that many spaces left of that size because the city's getting developed so much. And in terms of the mural ordinance and the ban that you were talking about, what happened is the city did have an ordinance that was a mural billboard sign ordinance. And so when they outlawed the big building wraps, then they they also outlawed murals with that. And when they outlawed murals by default, because the whole thing got banned, you know, the whole ordinance was like on hold or whatever, the city attorney and the LAPD used that as an excuse to go attacking graffiti cultural murals. And it's like, it was very blatant and rampant. And they would go tell building owners that, you know, this is gang related or it's an illegal sign and we're going to fine you $1,000 a day. And people got scared. And we're still dealing with that today. We're still dealing with the aftermath of being able to get private walls because people are scared that the police are going to come and do that to them again. Because this was like in the early 2000, this was from 2002 to 2012. So, you know, we kept painting murals, but a lot of them got buffed. But now we do have a mural ordinance where we have a lot less restrictions. We just have to like basically put in an application, and there's very little content restriction except for like hate speech and pornography or something. So we have made progress, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be that easy to just get access to the resources and the space. We really have to continue that fight. And so
and even though there's a legal like an open ordinance now that we can do murals, well, who's going to pay for our paint? Who's going to pay for our time? There's still not enough funding from the city or any other organizations to help us actually paint murals, right? So technically we can do as many murals as we want, but you know, financially, like who's going to sponsor, you know, these murals cost money. You know, you need $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 sometimes to create these murals. So that's kind of what's lacking, and that's the next thing that we have to figure out.
Hi, hello. I'm a 20-year vet in the graffiti art world. It saved me from joining gangs and like, you know, a violent lifestyle. And I noticed that you guys are at a stage above me where you have more power, more of a voice, right? And I'm wondering, what are you doing for the youth, for the kids? I give them art books and coloring books and all that, and I wanted to see if you guys can come into like South Central LA and help the kids out there, you know, like they don't have fathers and mothers. There's gangs and drugs everywhere. Like, what are you doing for the youth, the next generation of artists in the world that can't even afford to buy like coloring books or art supplies or like a crayons, you know what I mean? Like, do you have anything going on for that for our next generation?
Well, I mean, I'll answer real quickly on my, just in general, I know each one of us is doing something, either directly or indirectly, either consciously or unconsciously, dealing with that issue, because we all came from that in one way or another. The reason that we're here tonight is because I wrote a children's book. I illustrated a children's book called Chef Roy Choi and the Street Food Remix, which I'll be signing afterwards. But the library, because of that book, brought me in, and we had workshops all throughout the year, throughout the different branches. And so I did free workshops in Watts, in Baldwin Hills, and downtown, all over the city. And that's something that happened just because of me getting involved in doing a book, working with the library and seeing what's possible. And this is the culmination of that through LA Made. So personally, that's one thing I'm doing, but.
I always thanked Man because he was the guy who had the gallery and all that. And you would complain and says, man, I can't finish my work. I'm always helping so many other people. And, you know, I helped the youth when I was in my, you know, turned 40s. I helped all the teenagers. That was in the 80s, in the early 90s. And then I was volunteering for the Chicano for the galleries and helping organize with these shows. There were better people than me. There were a lot of women who helped an awful lot, helping handhold the kids, where I kind of knuckled them into doing the right thing. We're all still helping. What I'm going to suggest is that you have to do your job, because there's so many other kids. Now that I'm older, my kids are the 40-year-olds. What can I do to help them get into European museums? How can they get themselves enough money to get a mortgage to buy a home and all that stuff? I mean, that's where the 30-year-olds, want, what's next for them. That's how I help my kids and all that. So each one of us is helping the other generation. I'm sure Ace helps even the younger kids. But out there in the streets, a lot of crime are that 15 to 25-year-olds. They do the most destruction of anybody, and we all get blamed for it, So we all need to help those little, is the young youth. What you're doing is right. And there'll always be the next generation, but we're all helping in our own ways, So, we need to help the next generation, because who is there going to be? They're our audience. I look at these 15-year-olds, I said, I want you to get a good job. When you're 25 years old, you could buy my artwork, But it's more than that, because I want them to have a safe place to do their art. I want them to have a place where they could exhibit and have their voice and all that. So what can I do is make sure I finish my work, and open up those doors. That's how I help.
Well, like I had said earlier, I am a product of the 90s hip-hop generation of graffiti. And so one of our major philosophies, and the way that I learned everything I know, is from the each one, teach one kind of philosophy. So we definitely, pass that on. That's how we learn everything. There's no school for graffiti. But in addition to that, I actually focus my youth work with that age group of like 14 to 25 that are kind of in, I think, the most crucial times, because at the phase of life I'm at, I can really help them out and give them some information about resources and access and, just basic things from community college to community resources to get stabilized, to be able to do the work, to be able to sit down and do some art and develop your skills beyond just going out and getting up. So for me, I think the youth are the future, and I work with youth on a daily. I mentor young people, and I just try to keep the cycle going. But I do think that, we all do have a responsibility to do that. At the same time, just because we're up here on this panel, like, we still struggle for resources. So it's like, once the more we have, the more we can share. I currently work with the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory. I've done a lot of work throughout all of South Central, Inglewood to Hollywood to the East Side. But right now I'm in Boyle Heights, and we have a lot of great youth programs going on there that are not just necessarily visually art centered. We have like all kinds of different things, but yeah, if you have youth, then you can just kind of reach out to us on our Instagrams and see what hookups that we have in the area. It's like there's people all over, there's artists all over doing workshops, having black book sessions in their studios and stuff, just for local youth, to where they could just walk or skate over there. So it's really just about expanding your network so that who you can how you can help the next person, even if they're not right there next to you and you don't have the ability to do that.
Do either of you guys want to answer that? This will probably be just about working with youth, and what do you do to work with youth?
What do you think is your responsibility on that?
I think that responsibility for me, I think, started a while back. I actually work with children between the summer and the fall, between the ages of 6 and 12 at an art center that's ran by the Department of Cultural Affairs. And I just teach them basic drawing and painting. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. That's probably more than painting these walls. It's probably one of the major consistent things I've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years. But outside of that, my artwork in general, I want there to be something in the artwork that for every future generation, they're able to look at it and take away something from it, you know, that's going to help them become better people. I'm always looking at my art and seeing what can I do to make sure that, you know, the youth, they are attracted to what I'm doing in a way where it's positive for them. Because, I mean, if they don't like what I'm doing in 10 years, then that means my stuff is going to die out. You know, like, for example, like Chaz, I think, you know, he's had an impact on me, and that's from, like, when I was, like, high school, middle school. So if I can create that same effect, that I know that someone is going to be sitting in, you know, the same position I am one day, looking like, oh, man, if I had never saw Ace's stuff, then, you know, they would have never had the ability to go to another level. So I think that's how I want to, like, think, you know, that's how I want to move. I want to make sure that whatever I create, I can put something in it that's going to help uplift the youth for tomorrow.
Any projects you have that you want artists to get involved, if you reach out to most artists, they're willing to get involved. I shouldn't speak for everyone, but if you reach out to me, I will. I love to. I've worked with Artworks LA, Man's worked with Artworks. I get emails still from students who have gone on to go to Art Center and continue their art careers. And I think it's so much. You get so much satisfaction from that, helping them release like their creative outlet and find that there is a path to that. I just got back from Denver doing a project at underfunded school where there was 30 artists that donated murals. It was like Shepard Fairey, Findak, people from all over the world went out there. No one was paid. The people who put it on, the Raw Project, none of them were paid. It was all to give back to these kids who really didn't have much but a school that looked like a prison. And just to see their faces, that was enough. That's enough payment. And some of them coming up to you and saying, I want to be an artist, I want to be an artist. You know, that's what I do this for. And I think that project, they're trying to bring that to Los Angeles next. They've done it in Miami. And if anyone has any contacts in schools or anything like that, please let me know, because this is the next place they want to bring that, especially LA schools. You can go to other places and their schools still look a little drab, but LA's are the worst. You know, they are really bad, and just some color on the walls can brighten up a kid's day, make you want to go to school. If I had murals all over my schools when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have ditched so much. You know, I went to the LA River to see that. So bring that to the kids, and that might enlighten them a little more and have them, you know, follow their passion and not just get stuck into something they're not happy doing.
Cool. So I think we're running out of time now. You know, I know there's tons of more questions and everything like that, but just want to, first of all, thank all our panelists for being here today. So please give them a hand.